The thunder of hooves drowned out the wailing of the wind as Samuel Nash rode hard across the arid plains of Wyoming Territory, 1875, a man desperately trying to outrun ghosts that followed him like shadows at sunset. The dust kicked up behind him in clouds, obscuring the posse that had been pursuing him since dawn, men who believed a price on his head would fill their pockets and ease their consciences. Samuel had been riding for 3 days straight, sleeping in short bursts under the stars, his body aching and his heart even more so. 6 months ago, he did everything: a small ranch outside Redemption Creek, a loving wife named Mary, a 5-year-old son called James, and a daughter, little Elizabeth, barely 2. Now they were all gone, taken by a fever that swept through the territory like wildfire, claiming lives without mercy or distinction. The banks had taken his land while he was still burying his family. Then false accusations of cattle rustling from the wealthy Harrington family had turned him into a wanted man. Samuel had lost everything: his home, his family, and eventually, his faith in a God he once believed watched over good men. He pulled back on the reins as his exhausted horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Rusty, began to falter. Samuel knew he couldn't push the animal much further. He'd have to make a stand or find somewhere to hide. Ahead, he spotted a narrow canyon cutting through the foothills. It wasn't much, but it might provide shelter for the night and throw off the posse's tracking. As he guided Rusty toward the canyon entrance, a shot rang out, the bullet whizzing past his ear. Samuel ducked instinctively, spurring Rusty forward into a final burst of speed. More shots followed, but distance and the gathering dusk made him a difficult target. The canyon was narrow, its walls steep and unforgiving. Samuel ventured deeper, looking for a defensible position. The passage eventually widened into a small valley, and there, nestled against the far wall, stood a modest cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. Samuel hesitated. He couldn't involve innocent people in his troubles, but Rusty was at his limit, and the posse wouldn't be far behind. Necessity overcame caution as he guided his horse toward the cabin. Before he could reach it, the door swung open, and a woman stepped out, a rifle held confidently in her hands. Even in the fading light, Samuel could see she was young, perhaps 25, with copper-colored hair pulled back in a practical braid. "That's far enough, stranger," she called out, her voice clear and steady. "State your business." Samuel raised his hand slowly. "Madam, I mean no harm. I'm just looking for a place to rest my horse. There are men following me, but I'll be gone by dawn." The woman studied him for a long moment, taking in his haggard appearance, the bloodstains on his shirt, and the weariness in his eyes. "Those men?" she asked. "Would they be the posse from Redemption Creek?" Samuel nodded, surprised. "You know of them?" A bitter smile crossed her face. "I know of Sheriff Dawson and his so-called justice. I know of the Harrington family and their ways." She lowered her rifle slightly. "I'm Cassandra Flynn. Most folks call me Cass." "Samuel Nash," he replied, then added cautiously, "though that name might not be welcome in these parts." Cass nodded, as if confirming something to herself. "The man they're calling a rustler and a murderer." It wasn't a question. "I've heard the stories. I've also heard different versions from those brave enough to speak against the Harringtons." A distant call echoed down the canyon, followed by the sound of horses. The posse had found his trail. Cass made her decision quickly. "Get your horse to the back. There's a small corral behind some boulders. Then come inside and keep quiet." Samuel hesitated only a moment before doing as she instructed. He led Rusty to the hidden corral, where a pair of horses, a sturdy bay and a dappled mare, regarded the newcomer with mild interest. He quickly unsaddled Rusty, gave him a quick rub-down with a handful of straw, and made sure he had water. By the time he slipped into the cabin, the sounds of the posse were growing louder. Cass motioned for him to sit at the rough-hewn table while she busied herself at the stove. "Why are you helping me?" Samuel asked quietly. "You don't know me." Cass turned, her green eyes meeting his. "I know enough. I know the Harringtons accused my father of stealing their water rights 3 years ago. I know they burned our ranch and shot him when he tried to stop them. And I know Sheriff Dawson called it a tragic accident despite 5 witnesses." She stirred something in a pot that smelled tantalizingly of rabbit stew. "So yes, Mr. Nash, I think I know enough to decide whose side I'm on." The sound of hoofbeats and men's voices grew louder, then stopped altogether. A heavy knock came at the door. Cass glanced at Samuel, then toward a small door that presumably led to a bedroom. "Hide," she mouthed. Samuel slipped into the bedroom just as Cass opened the front door. Through the thin wall, he could hear the conversation clearly. "Evening, Miss Flynn," came a gruff voice Samuel recognized as Deputy Miller, a man who had once been friendly to him. "Apologies for disturbing you so late. What brings the law to my door, Deputy?" Cass's voice was cool, but not overtly hostile. "We're tracking a fugitive, Samuel Nash, wanted for cattle rustling and the murder of one of Harrington's ranch hands. Seen anyone ride through here? I've been inside since sundown, preparing my supper. Haven't seen a soul." There was a pause, and Samuel could imagine the deputy's eyes scanning what he could see of the cabin interior. "Mind if we take a look around? He's dangerous, Miss Flynn. Wouldn't want you getting hurt." "I appreciate your concern, Deputy, but as you can see, I'm alone, and I'd prefer to keep my privacy. Unless you have a warrant." Another voice cut in, one that made Samuel's blood run cold. Elias Harrington, Jr., the eldest son of the man who had orchestrated Samuel's downfall. "We don't need warrants to protect citizens from killers, Miss Flynn. Step aside." Samuel tensed, ready to reveal himself rather than let Cass face Harrington's wrath, but her next words stopped him. "You'll find that out here, Mr. Harrington, people still respect property rights, even for a woman living alone. I know the law, gentlemen. My father made sure of that before your family murdered him." A tense silence followed. "Now," Cass continued, "I've answered your questions. I haven't seen your fugitive. It's getting late, and I'd like to finish my supper in peace." Deputy Miller cleared his throat. "We'll continue our search elsewhere, Miss Flynn. But if you do see Nash, you send word immediately. He's not the man you might remember." "I'll keep that in mind, Deputy. Good night." The door closed, and Samuel heard the retreating sounds of horses. He remained still, counting his heartbeats until Cass opened the bedroom door. "They're heading further into the canyon," she said. "They'll realize it's a dead end soon enough, but it should buy us some time." Samuel emerged, studying her with new respect. That was brave. And foolish. Harrington doesn't forget those who cross him. Cass returned to her stew, spooning portions into 2 wooden bowls. "I crossed the Harringtons the moment I survived what they did to my family. Now sit and eat. You look half dead." Samuel didn't need to be told twice. The stew was hearty and flavorful, the first proper meal he'd had in days. As he ate, he found himself telling Cass about the events that had led him here, the loss of his family to fever, his grief-stricken neglect of the ranch that gave the bank its opportunity, and finally, the false accusations from the Harringtons when he refused to sell his water rights to them. "They claimed I stole 20 head of their cattle," he explained bitterly. "Then when their ranch hand, Thompson, came to recover them, they said I shot him. Truth is, Thompson came with 3 others, all armed. They started shooting, and Thompson caught a stray bullet from one of his own men. But with the Harringtons' money backing the story, my word meant nothing." Cass listened quietly, her face showing neither pity nor judgment, just a deep understanding that comforted Samuel more than words could have. "What will you do now?" she asked when he had finished. Samuel stared into his empty bowl. "Keep running, I suppose. Maybe head to Colorado, or even California. And let them win." There was a challenge in her voice. "Let them take everything and walk away?" "They already have taken everything," Samuel said, his voice hollow. Cass leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Not everything. You're still alive. You know the truth. And now, you have me." Samuel looked up, startled by her words. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." She repeated her earlier sentiment. "I know you're a man who's been wronged, just as I was. And I know that 2 people standing together have a better chance than one alone." Something stirred in Samuel's chest, a feeling he'd thought long buried with his family hope, mixed with a wariness he couldn't shake. "What are you suggesting?" "Stay," she said simply. "Rest. Recover your strength. This canyon is hard to find unless you know it's here. My father discovered it years ago, built this cabin as a hunting lodge before we established our ranch. Few people know it exists. And then what?" Cass smiled, a determined glint in her eye. "And then we fight back. Not with guns or violence, but with the truth. I've been gathering evidence against the Harringtons for years, testimonies from people they've wronged, records of bribes, proof of their methods. Your case could be the final piece we need." Samuel shook his head. It's too dangerous. These men are just men, she interrupted. Powerful, yes. Dangerous, certainly. But not untouchable. Not if enough people stand against them. The conviction in her voice was almost enough to make him believe. Almost. Get some rest, she said, seeing his exhaustion. You can take the bedroom. I'll sleep out here by the fire. I can't take your bed. You're not, she cut him off. You're borrowing it. There's a difference. She stood, collecting their bowls. Tomorrow's soon enough to make decisions. Too tired to argue further, Samuel retired to the small bedroom. The bed was narrow but comfortable, with a quilt that smelled of lavender and sunshine. Despite his wariness, despite the danger still lurking, he fell into the deepest sleep he'd known since losing his family. He dreamed of Mary that night, not as she had been in those final, fever-racked days, but as she had been when they first met, laughing, vibrant, full of life. In the dream, she smiled at him, touched his face, and whispered, "Live, Samuel. For us, live." He woke with tears on his cheeks and the first pale light of dawn filtering through the small window. For a moment, he lay still, listening to the sounds of the cabin, the crack of the fire, the soft movements as Cass prepared breakfast, the distant whinny of horses outside. It felt, not like home, exactly, but like a place where he might find peace. Samuel rose, washed his face in the basin provided, and stepped into the main room. Cass stood at the stove, her hair loose around her shoulders, catching the morning light like burnished copper. She turned at his approach, and something in her smile made his heart beat a little faster. "I heard you crying out in your sleep," she said gently. "Bad dreams?" Samuel shook his head. "No, good ones, actually. Of people I've lost." Cass nodded in understanding. "Those can be the hardest kind." She gestured to the table, where coffee and a plate of biscuits waited. "Sit. Eat. Then we can talk about what comes next." As they ate, Cass outlined her plan. She had connections in Redemption Creek, people who had also suffered at the Harringtons' hands, but were afraid to speak out alone. A newspaper editor in the neighboring town of Liberty Springs who had been trying to expose corruption in the territory. Even a circuit judge who was known for his integrity. "It won't be easy," she admitted. "The Harringtons have money and influence. But they've made enemies too, and not everyone can be bought." Samuel listened, finding himself drawn to her passion and determination. It reminded him of Mary, who had never backed down from what she believed was right. Yet Cass was different too, harder in some ways, shaped by different losses, different pains. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked finally. "Why risk everything for a stranger?" Cass was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "When my father died and our ranch was burned, I wanted to die too. I had nothing left, no family, no home, no future I could see. I came up here to this cabin too. Well, to end things, if I'm being honest." Samuel's breath caught at her confession. "But then I found my father's journal," she continued. He'd been documenting everything the Harringtons had done, not just to us, but to others in the territory. He believed that someday, someone would use that information to bring them to justice. She looked up, meeting Samuel's gaze. "I decided to live for that purpose. It's given me a reason to keep going these past 3 years. And now you're here, with your own piece of the story. And if we fail?" Samuel asked softly. "Then we fail knowing we tried," she replied. "Which is better than living with the knowledge that we did nothing." Her words resonated within him, awakening something that had been dormant since he'd buried his family, a desire for justice, not just vengeance. "All right," he said finally. "Where do we start?" Cass smiled, relief and determination mingling in her expression. "We start by getting your name cleared. And I think I know just the person who can help." 2 days later, under the cover of darkness, they rode into Liberty Springs, a growing town about 30 miles from Redemption Creek. Cass had insisted Samuel remain at the cabin until nightfall, wary of the posse that might still be searching. They'd spent the intervening time planning, with Cass showing Samuel her father's journal and the other evidence she'd collected. Liberty Springs was smaller than Redemption Creek, but more prosperous, with proper wooden sidewalks along the main street and a 2-story hotel that boasted actual glass windows. Cass led them to a modest building at the edge of town with a sign that read Liberty Springs Sentinel hanging over the door. A light still burned inside despite the late hour. Cass knocked a specific pattern 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a bespectacled man in his 40s, ink stains on his fingers, and a wary expression that softened when he recognized Cass. "Miss Flynn," he greeted her. "This is unexpected, and you've brought company." "Mr. Thornton," Cass replied. "This is Samuel Nash. He needs your help, and he has a story I think you'll want to hear." The editor's eyebrows rose at Samuel's name, but he stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Then you'd better come in quickly. That name carries a hefty price these days." The newspaper office was cluttered but organized, with stacks of papers and a large printing press dominating the main room. Thornton led them to a back office where a pot of coffee simmered on a small stove. "So," he said once they were seated, "you're the infamous Samuel Nash. Cattle rustler, murderer, and general menace to society, if one believes the broadsheets and wanted posters." "None of which is true," Samuel replied evenly. Thornton studied him over the rim of his spectacles. "I suspected as much. The Harringtons have a particular pattern when they want someone's land or water rights. First come the offers, then the threats, and finally, the accusations." He glanced at Cass, "as Miss Flynn's family discovered." For the next hour, Samuel recounted his story in detail while Thornton took notes, asking occasional pointed questions. Cass supplemented with information from her father's journal, pointing out patterns that matched Samuel's experience. When they finished, Thornton sat back, tapping his pencil against his notepad. "It's compelling," he admitted, "especially when combined with the other cases I've documented. But it's still your word against theirs, and in this territory, their word carries more weight with most judges." "Most, but not all," Cass countered. "What about Judge McAllister? He ruled against the Harringtons in the Miller case last year, and nearly had his career ruined for it," Thornton reminded her. "But you're right, he might be sympathetic." He thought for a moment. "There's something else. Thompson, the ranch hand who was supposedly murdered, I knew him slightly. He had a wife, Abigail, lives just outside of town here. After his death, the Harringtons gave her a pittance, barely enough for funeral expenses, despite their public claims about taking care of their own." "You think she might help?" Samuel asked, hope kindling. "I think she might be willing to share what Thompson told her about the Harringtons' business practices," Thornton replied carefully. "Especially if it means securing a proper widow's pension from the territory, which she'd be entitled to if her husband's death was ruled a legitimate workplace accident rather than a murder." Cass leaned forward eagerly. "That could be the testimony we need. If she confirms the Harringtons sent Thompson and others to intimidate Samuel, it still might not be enough," Thornton cautioned. "We'd need more than one person's word." "What about the other ranch hands who were there?" Samuel suggested. "One of them fired the shot that killed Thompson. He might carry guilt over that." Thornton nodded slowly. "Worth investigating. I have some contacts who might know their whereabouts." He gathered his notes. "I'll need time to pursue these leads. In the meantime, you two should lay low. The Harringtons have eyes everywhere, and if they get wind of what we're doing—" "We understand," Cass assured him. "We have a safe place to stay." As they prepared to leave, Thornton handed Cass a small package. Latest editions of the major territorial papers, including the ones controlled by the Harringtons. Best to know what they're saying. They rode back to the canyon under a sky brilliant with stars, maintaining a careful watch for any signs of pursuit. The night was quiet save for the rhythm of their horses' hooves and the occasional call of a night bird. "Do you think it will work?" Samuel asked after they had ridden in silence for some time. Cass considered before answering. "I think we have a chance. Better than you had alone. Better than I had before you came." There was truth in her words, and something more, a connection forming between them, born of shared purpose and mutual understanding. Samuel felt it growing with each passing day, a warmth he had thought forever extinguished. Back at the cabin, they reviewed the newspapers Thornton had provided. The Redemption Creek Gazette, owned by the Harringtons, portrayed Samuel as a dangerous criminal, increasing the reward for his capture. But the Liberty Springs Sentinel had published a small article questioning the evidence against certain wanted men and calling for fair trials before judgment. Thornton's already planting seeds, Cass observed with satisfaction. The days that followed fell into a pattern. They remained vigilant, taking turns keeping watch, but also found time to share stories of their past lives. Samuel spoke of Mary and the children, finding that the memories brought more comfort than pain when shared with someone who listened with genuine care. Cass told him about growing up on her family's ranch, her mother's death when she was 12, and the close bond she'd formed with her father. "He taught me everything," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. "How to ride, how to shoot, how to read the land." Said there was no reason a daughter couldn't do everything a son could. A sad smile touched her lips. He would have fought the Harringtons to his last breath if they'd faced him honestly instead of ambushing him. Samuel reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "He'd be proud of what you're doing now." Cass turned her hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I like to think so." The touch lingered, neither of them willing to break the connection. In that moment, something shifted between them, the spark of attraction that had been building acknowledged at last. "Samuel," Cass began softly, but was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. They sprang apart, instantly alert. It was past midnight, too late for casual visitors. Samuel moved to the bedroom where they kept their weapons while Cass approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" she called. "Thornton," came the reply. "I come with news and companions." Cass opened the door to reveal not only Thornton but two other figures, a woman in widow's black and a young man with a nervous expression. Samuel emerged from the bedroom, his hand still resting on the pistol at his hip. "It's all right," Thornton assured them. "This is Abigail Thompson and Levi Parker, one of the ranch hands who was present when Thompson died. They've agreed to tell their stories." Over the next few hours, by lamplight, they pieced together a damning picture. Abigail Thompson revealed that her husband had confided his discomfort with the Harringtons' methods, particularly their practice of forcing smaller ranchers off their land. Levi Parker, barely 20 years old, admitted with shame that it had been his bullet that killed Thompson during the confrontation at Samuel's ranch. "Mr. Harrington told us to scare you, maybe rough you up a bit, but not to kill anyone," Parker explained, his voice trembling. "When the shooting started, I panicked. Thompson stepped into my line of fire." He looked up, his young face earnest. "I told Mr. Harrington what happened, but he said to keep quiet, that they'd pin it on you. Said if I spoke up, I'd hang alongside you. Are you willing to testify to this?" Thornton asked. "Before Judge McAllister?" Parker swallowed hard, but nodded. "Yes, sir. I haven't slept right since it happened. My ma raised me better than to let an innocent man hang for my mistake. And I'll testify to what Thomas told me about the Harringtons' intentions toward your land," Abigail added, addressing Samuel directly. "My husband wasn't a perfect man, but he wouldn't have wanted this. He wouldn't have wanted his name used to destroy another family." Hope, so long absent, surged through Samuel. With these testimonies, combined with Cass's evidence and Thornton's investigative work, they had a real chance at justice. "Judge McAllister will be in Liberty Springs next week for the circuit court," Thornton informed them. "I've already sent word requesting a special hearing. If he agrees, we'll need you all there." "It's dangerous," Samuel cautioned. "The Harringtons won't take this challenge lying down." "Which is why I've also arranged for some additional protection," Thornton replied. "The territorial marshal owes me a favor. He'll be in town with several deputies, ostensibly for the court session, but really to ensure no unfortunate accidents befall our witnesses." They spent the remainder of the night finalizing their plan. Thornton would continue gathering evidence and preparing his newspaper to publish the full story once the judge had heard their case. Abigail and Parker would stay at a secure location in Liberty Springs until the hearing. Samuel and Cass would remain at the cabin, only venturing to town on the day of the hearing itself. As dawn approached, Thornton and the witnesses prepared to leave. "1 week," Thornton reminded them. "Be careful until then." After they had gone, Cass and Samuel sat at the table, the remains of the night's coffee cold between them. The silence was filled with unspoken thoughts and the weight of what they had set in motion. "Are you afraid?" Cass asked finally. "Yes," Samuel admitted. "Not of dying, I've been ready for that since I lost my family. But of failing. Of the Harringtons escaping justice again. Of others suffering because of our actions. I'm afraid too," Cass confessed. "But not enough to stop." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "Whatever happens, Samuel, we're facing it together." The words echoed those she had spoken when they first met. "You still have me." Then, they had been an offer of alliance. Now, they carried deeper meaning. Samuel turned his hand to clasp hers properly. Together, he agreed, and in that simple word was a promise that extended beyond their fight for justice. The week passed with agonizing slowness. They prepared as best they could, reviewing the evidence, rehearsing their testimonies, and keeping watch for any sign that their plan had been discovered. Through it all, the connection between them continued to grow, expressed in small gestures, a touch of hands when passing items, lingering glances across the room, conversations that stretched long into the night. On the eve of the hearing, as they sat beside the fire, Samuel finally gave voice to what had been building between them. "I never expected to feel this way again," he said quietly. "After Mary died, I thought that part of me died too." Cass's eyes reflected the firelight as she looked at him. "And now I find myself thinking of a future beyond tomorrow, beyond this case." He took a deep breath. "A future that might include you, if you'd want that." The smile that bloomed on her face was answer enough, but she spoke anyway. "I've been alone a long time, Samuel, building walls, focusing on vengeance rather than living. You've reminded me there's more to life than just surviving." He moved to sit beside her, their shoulders touching. "If we succeed tomorrow, when we succeed," she corrected with characteristic determination. Samuel smiled. "When we succeed, what then? For us? Then we begin again," she said simply. Together. The word held promise, possibility, a bridge from their painful pasts to a shared future. Samuel leaned in, hesitant at first, then with growing certainty as Cass met him halfway. Their kiss was gentle, an acknowledgement of fragile hearts beginning to heal, yet with an underlying strength that spoke of resilience and hope. When they parted, Samuel kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Together," he echoed, the word a vow. They rode into Liberty Springs the next morning side by side, their faces set with determination. The town was busier than usual, news of the special hearing having spread. As they approached the courthouse, Samuel spotted several hard-faced men wearing territorial marshal badges, Thornton's promised protection. Inside, the courtroom was already filling with spectators. Thornton waited near the front with Abigail Thompson and Levi Parker. On the opposite side sat Elias Harrington Jr., his father, and their lawyer, their expressions ranging from contemptuous to concerned. Judge McAllister, a stern-faced man with iron-gray hair and piercing eyes, entered and called the court to order. "This is a special hearing to review evidence in the case against Samuel Nash," he announced. "I understand there are new witnesses and information that may materially affect the charges." For the next several hours, the stories unfolded. Abigail spoke eloquently of her husband's confessions regarding the Harrington's tactics. Parker, nervous but resolute, admitted to firing the fatal shot and being pressured to remain silent. Thornton presented a comprehensive account of similar patterns involving other ranchers in the territory. Samuel testified about the confrontation at his ranch, the loss of his family to fever, and the Harrington's persistent efforts to acquire his water rights. Throughout, he kept his gaze steady, his voice clear, aware of Cass's supportive presence behind him. When Cass took the stand, she presented her father's journal and her own carefully gathered evidence, detailing the systematic corruption that had allowed the Harringtons to expand their empire unchecked for years. The Harringtons' lawyer attempted to discredit each witness, painting them as opportunists with grudges against his clients. But the weight of evidence, the consistency of the testimonies, and the presence of the territorial marshal lent credibility to their case that proved difficult to dismiss. As the hearing stretched into the afternoon, Judge McAllister called a brief recess to review all the evidence. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as everyone awaited his decision. Samuel and Cass stepped outside for some air, finding a quiet corner of the courthouse veranda. "No matter what happens," Samuel said, taking her hands in his, "I want you to know what you've given me. Not just help or shelter or a chance at clearing my name, but something I thought was gone forever: hope. A reason to keep living." Cass squeezed his hands. "You've done the same for me. Before you came, I was existing, not living. Consumed by the past, unable to imagine a future." She smiled, a brightness in her eyes that made his heart swell. "Now I can see it so clearly." They returned to the courtroom as the judge resumed his seat. The room fell silent as McAllister cleared his throat. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony presented today, I find sufficient cause to dismiss all charges against Samuel Nash in the matter of cattle rustling and the death of Thomas Thompson. He fixed the Harringtons with a stern gaze. Furthermore, I am ordering a full investigation into the business practices of Harrington Ranch, with particular attention to allegations of intimidation, false testimony, and misuse of legal processes. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Elias Harrington Sr. rose to his feet, his face mottled with rage, but a sharp word from his lawyer made him subside. "Mr. Nash," the judge continued, "the court extends its apologies for the injustice you have suffered. Your property rights to your original homestead are hereby restored, though I understand the land has since been sold by the bank." He consulted a document before him. "However, as compensation for wrongful prosecution, this court awards you damages in the amount of $5,000 to be paid by the Harrington estate." Samuel sat stunned. It was more than he had dared hope for, not just his name cleared, but means to start again. "Court is adjourned," McAllister declared, bringing down his gavel with finality. The aftermath was a blur of congratulations and relief. Thornton promised a full account of the proceedings would be in the next edition of the Sentinel. The territorial marshal assured them that the investigation into the Harringtons would be thorough and impartial. As they prepared to leave, Samuel noticed Elias Harrington Jr. approaching. He tensed, but the man stopped at a respectful distance, his expression unreadable. "This isn't over, Nash," he said quietly, but without the menace Samuel might have expected. "My father won't let it go easily." "Then he'll face the consequences," Samuel replied evenly. Just as he should have years ago. Harrington's gaze shifted to Cass, then back to Samuel. "For what it's worth, I never believed you killed Thompson. But family loyalty." He left the sentence unfinished, nodded once, and walked away. Outside the courthouse, in the golden light of late afternoon, Samuel turned to Cass. "What now?" Her smile was radiant. "Now we go home. And tomorrow, we start building something new." Home. The word resonated within him. Not the ranch he had lost, but something else, something they would create together. 3 months later, Samuel stood on the porch of a newly constructed cabin, watching as Cass rode up the trail that led to their property. With his compensation money and Cass's savings, they had purchased a modest parcel of land halfway between Liberty Springs and Redemption Creek, close enough to town for convenience, but far enough for peace. The investigation into the Harringtons had revealed extensive corruption. Elias Sr. had fled the territory rather than face charges, while Elias Jr. had made the surprising choice to cooperate with authorities, perhaps seeking to salvage what he could of the family's legitimate holdings. Redemption Creek was slowly changing, with new leadership and a growing sense that justice might actually be attainable for ordinary folk. Thornton's newspaper now circulated widely throughout the territory, its fearless reporting helping to ensure transparency. As Cass dismounted, Samuel stepped forward to greet her, taking in the sight of her sun-kissed face and the joy in her eyes that mirrored his own. "The last of the furniture arrived at Thornton's office," she reported, "and I picked up the mail." She handed him a letter bearing an official seal. Samuel opened it, scanning the contents quickly. "The territorial governor has approved the establishment of the new school," he announced. "Construction can begin next month." It had been Cass's idea to use part of their land and some of their remaining funds to build a small school for the children of surrounding homesteads. Samuel would teach, fulfilling a dream Mary had once encouraged but that he had set aside for ranching. "That's wonderful news," Cass said, slipping her arm around his waist as they walked toward the cabin. One more step forward. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable, with touches that made it uniquely theirs. Bookshelves filled with volumes they both treasured, a quilt Cass had made during the winter months, pictures of both their families displayed together on the mantel. As evening fell, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in hues of gold and crimson. Samuel's arm rested around Cass's shoulders, her head leaning against him in comfortable familiarity. "I was thinking," he said after a companionable silence, "about what you said that first night, when I told you I'd lost everything." Cass looked up at him. "You still have me," she quoted softly. "Yes." Samuel smiled, remembering how those words had cut through his despair, offering a lifeline when he'd been drowning. And now I understand that as long as we have each other, we have everything that truly matters. Cass reached up to touch his face, her expression tender. We've built something good here, Samuel. Something lasting. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Samuel Nash, once a man who had lost his home, his family, and his faith, held close the woman who had restored his hope and helped him find a new path forward. Together, they had faced injustice and emerged stronger. Together, they had created a home built on love and mutual respect. Together, they would face whatever the future might bring. And in that moment, under the vast Wyoming sky, Samuel knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be.